Hi everyone, just in advance, I'm gonna be using the bathroom really quick. Uh, Sorry, I just need like 5 minutes. Apologize for the delay.
What's up everyone and welcome back to this YouTube channel. Today in this video
It seems that everybody is in the Zoom room. Is everyone ready to begin?
Is it possible to just give us 1 second?
No problem.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, before we begin, is everyone okay to begin an email chain? I have the emails from the judges' paradigms. If anyone would like to be excluded, please let me know. And opposing team, please put your emails in the chat.
Okay, we are ready to begin.
So I have just sent out the email chain and we are also ready to begin. If everybody is ready. Hello, everyone. My name is Ellen. I'm the first speaker for the Affirmative team, Acclive ZL. If everyone's ready, I'll begin my constructive speech in 3, 2, 1. Contention 1 is clean energy. To avoid the worst impacts of climate change, observe a livable planet. Scientific consensus shows that emissions need to reach net zero by 2050, according to the United Nations. A clean energy transition away from fossil fuels is vital, and only nuclear energy solves. We have 3 warrants. First, nuclear energy is a clean energy source. World Nuclear Association says nuclear energy is low carbon, can be deployed on a large scale at the timetable card, supplying the world with clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. Besides being clean, it's powerful. The Department of Energy 21 finds you would need over 3 million solar panels or 430 wind turbines to produce the same amount of power as 1 nuclear reactor. Second, other clean energy sources are insufficient and continue to fail us. Canary Media 25 warns, despite a record year for renewables, with solar and wind generating more power than coal for the first time, carbon emissions fell by just 0.2%. This is because of the intermittency of renewables. DOE 25 explains nuclear has the highest capacity factor out of any other energy source, producing reliable and secure power more than 92% of the time, which is twice as much as coal or natural gas, as well as 3 times more than wind or solar plants, which only run 35% and 25% of the time, respectively. Already, International Atomic Energy Agency says higher nuclear power production contributes to the leveling of global CO2 emissions. The Nuclear Energy Institute reports every year nuclear generated electricity saves over 470 million metric tons of emissions. However, until the US seriously invests in nuclear power, a clean energy future will never be realized. Third is innovation. Nuclear Energy Agency adds that innovation is necessary to develop new nuclear technologies that will be cheaper, more flexible, and faster to deploy. This is uniquely possible right now because IEA 23 explains AI holds promising potential for advancing nuclear energy production with its capability to enhance efficiency, automation, safety, and predictive maintenance, as well as optimize processes. Otherwise, the main impact is staggering death. Casella 23 finds that every 0.1 degrees Celsius of warming, the world suffers 100 million deaths. Contender 2 is the economy. The US economy is in trouble. Corel 25 warns the tech layoff wave in 2024 saw more than 150,000 job cuts across 542 countries, including large companies like Tesla and Google. Thankfully, nuclear energy helps, and the NEI reports nuclear energy industry is a powerful engine for job creation. The US nuclear energy sector directly employs more than 70,000 people in high-quality jobs, or 250 when you include secondary jobs. NEI continues that nuclear plants can operate up to 80 years or more, providing jobs for generations, and employ people from a range of fields and educational backgrounds. The impact is the economy. Cordell 20 warns for every 1% unemployment goes up, 40,000 people die. On the other hand, Center for American Progress 22 reports a growing labor supply can help bring down inflation without causing an economic downturn and expand the economy's productive capacity. This also makes it easier to address looming challenges such as climate change, aging infrastructure, and healthcare needs. Contention 3 is the US leadership. According to the IEA 22, nuclear energy is a form of energy released from the nucleus. It can be produced in 2 ways: fission when the nuclei is split, or fusion when nuclei fuse together. Currently, most nuclear power plants run on fission, but nuclear fusion could be the future of clean energy. IEA 23 says if nuclear fusion could be replicated at industrial scale, it can provide virtually limitless, clean, safe, and affordable energy. Fusion could generate 4 times more energy than fission, or 4 million times more energy than oil or coal. Thus, the first impact is climate change. The only problem is a lack of research in the US. Worse, the US is being overtaken by rival countries like China and Russia. Terrasoft 25 warns China is putting in $1.5 billion annually compared to $800 million from the US. The second impact is that fusion is critical to leadership. Terrasoft continues that whoever has essentially abundant limitless energy can impact everything you think of. A scary thought if it's in the wrong hands. Miller 22 asks that should China be able to corner a market of a limitless, cheap, clean energy alternative, they will hold an enormous amount of leverage by effectively controlling the nuclear energy sector. In an age where nuclear energy shapes the international system. Mom Task 25 states how the dominant position of China allows it to control world markets, develop future energy systems, and expand political influence. Such power causes U.S. concern to grow as Kim 19 found, increases to the chance of war between the two. Ultimately, Cronin 21 finds the dangerous consequences of Chinese war, as its lead in advanced technology would embolden the country, being more confident to attack a neighbor and block U.S. liberation attempts, shifting the balance of power that can lead to war and nuclear escalation. Barris 21 finds conflict between the two could easily launch into a great power war paired with the use of nuclear weapons and other destructive technologies, leading to human extinction. To solve the challenges of today and our future, please vote for the affirmative. Acclive ZL.
All right, great. Just to introduce myself before I begin my speech, my name is Paul Wong, and we are on the affirmative side, or on the negative side of today's debate. Is everyone ready? All right, perfect. Time starts now. Contention 1 is trade-off. Regardless of nuclear energy, renewables are on path to create a green future in 2 decades. Beinhocker 25 explains, Trump cannot save a shrinking fossil fuel industry. Clean energy is 10,000 times cheaper, costs a tenth today. Solar will supply all needs by 2035. Nuclear energy kills renewables, diverts attention, resources, and monopolizes the grid. Make them answer every reasons. Can 24 explains the alarming nuclear push. Lobbyists derailed deals supporting renewables. 100% renewable ambition is required. Wind avoids 4 times more CO2 than nuclear. Nuclear is unreliable. Heat waves, droughts, flooding, increased disconnections. SMRs have the same limitations. Bornstein 23 concludes that humanity can prevent the worst, and this requires quickly slashing fossil fuel use. Humanity is on thin ice, needs action. It's not too late. After 1.5 degrees, risk pile on a critical limit and lead to extinction from a hothouse effect. Contention 2 is terrorism. Risk of nuclear terror is growing. Wilton 25, nuclear terrorism remains really real. The Israel-Hamas-Hezbollah war as a proxy of Iran highlights the real world where non-state actors and nuclear-seeking states collaborate in warfare. International terror groups are recruiting Americans. Right-wing terror 2, Earnhardt 21. Far-right extremists represent a unique danger because of their prevalence in the military and might infiltrate nuclear facilities where they access nuclear materials. Subpoint A is reactor attacks. Nuclear facilities are vulnerable targets. In Hiroshima 7, it is less likely that U.S. reactors would survive the impact of a light aircraft carrier with high explosive. Excessive non-cited violations by the nuclear NRC constitute a sign of complacency and vulnerability. Individuals were allowed unescorted access through private areas. This causes meltdown, as Hodges 19 finds that water will heat up, boil away, and uncover spent fuel rods. This would lead to fires and release radioactivity into the atmosphere, an extinction level event. Subpoint B is proliferation. Pashby 25 explains that enriched uranium can fuel SMR nuclear reactors. Interest in a nuclear reactor, spurred by the US government funding, can mean the creation of bombs. Non-state actors will see their way of accessing nuclear materials that they could never imagine getting a hold of in the past. Design measures cannot meaningfully guard against the diversion of nuclear material. More sites and materials can create opportunities for bad actors. This is the missing piece for extremists. NA 19 explains that highly enriched bomb-grade uranium-produced reactors might divert from terrorists. Terrorists can build nuclear weapons if they get materials. Numerous studies, including the Department of Defense, prove. NTI 25 explains that numerous studies determine the terrorist organization with fissile material can engineer a nuclear weapon, U.S. Office of Technology, and U.S. Department of Defense. Even one attack escalates and turns every single impact. As Buoys 18 finds, the terrorist nuclear attack would cause unprecedented catastrophic consequences, go probably worldwide, global distress, spark tension and misuse, overall decrease self-control, escalate present conflicts and the emergence of new ones. Contention 3 is grid stability. Nuclear energy has become a possibility, as WNA finds that 30 countries are planning on starting nuclear programs, and a further 20 countries have at some point expressed interest. Unfortunately, none of these programs have proven effective. There are 2 issues with nuclear power. First is time. Nuclear plants take too long to build, as Jacobson 24 finds that the whole planning to operation time for these reactors is at least 32 years. That of any individual reactor is 19 years. Inevitably, the world shifts to reliance on natural gas, as Gordon 24 finds that during the transition period between coal retiring and nuclear coming online, gas will be a huge feature. Second is power. Nuclear energy lacks the ramp-up power necessary to meet demands on the electric grid, as Jacobson 24 finds that nuclear power never matches demand, so it needs backup. Even with advanced nuclear energy programs, the maximum ramp-up rate is 1 to 5% per minute. That's why countries using nuclear power still need gas. Jacobson continues that France, with one of the most advanced programs, still needs natural gas to meet demand. Japan also proves, despite spending billions of dollars to build nuclear reactors, Daskalu 24 finds that Japan still heavily relies on fossil fuels today. Indeed, nuclear energy actually increases our dependence on gas, which is detrimental. Relying on gas is costly. Gordon 24 reports And that nuclear power in Australia raised electricity bills by $665 a year. Filling the energy gap with gas could cost $70 billion. More importantly, it risks lives. Climate change is disastrous. Taylor et al. 24 finds that every degree adds to warming. Carbon makes the ocean acidic. Oceans cannot adapt. A cascade effect would push the Earth on a hot house path. Tipping points escalate. It is impossible to adapt. For these reasons, we urge a negative ballot in today's round. Okay, are you all ready to begin cross?
May I have the first question?
Yeah.
I'll begin the timer now. Let's talk about your example of France. You said that France will still rely on fossil fuels. What percent of its energy relies on fossil fuels?
I don't have the exact percentage off the top of my head. However, the fact is that when
Sure,
they
I
use
can tell
nuclear
you.
energy, they're still using
France derives 67% of energy from nuclear energy, 28% from renewables, and only 5% from fossil fuels in total. If these are the effects, Judge, that you can gain for the US by voting affirmative, I would argue that it's way better than any alternative.
But the fact
Yeah.
is that's only one example that we bring up in case. We also give you the example about Japan, and our evidence finds that over 30 countries have considered nuclear weapons, and most fail due to the time constraints and due to the lack of power output. May I ask
Are
a
we
question?
talking about nuclear energy or nuclear weapons?
Sorry, nuclear energy.
Sure. So why are these countries closer to the US than France is? Why are they a better example of what will happen in the US than France is?
Because it provides a more holistic analysis of how nuclear programs work. Additionally, if we want to look at the US specifically, past US nuclear plants have failed. Most nuclear plants are on the verge of shutting down right now due to structural issues, not
Because
investment.
of lack of investment, which stopped
No,
them
no,
from,
no.
for example, upgraded and such,
Our
right?
evidence specifically says that these issues are structural. For example, the water is heating up for geographic constraints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get more into that in rebuttal. However, our evidence also indicates that they are going to shut down by 2040 due to things like water and geographic constraints, which are structural issues. You can't like cool down the water that effectively. May I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Okay, so on your argument about the economy, how easy is it for a person to obtain a nuclear job
We
or
already
enter
said
the
it
nuclear
creates
sector?
a lot of jobs. I don't know how easy it is, but it still means that 250,000 people are employed by nuclear energy, and you'll see more people being employed if you vote affirmative.
Okay, I'll actually answer the question for you. Nuclear is
Yeah.
one of the hardest industries to get into because of its because it requires so much specialties, and yeah, it requires so much specialties. So insofar as most people who are getting fired right now don't have those same specialties that someone who runs a nuclear
Our
reactor has.
impact, sorry, our evidence says otherwise. For example, it says that nuclear plants can employ people from a range of fields and educational backgrounds. For example, they need people for like operation or research and such. So it's a lot of fields that people are being fired from right now. So yes, I do think it applies, and these people can be employed in nuclear energy. Do you
Okay, you ask a
have a
question.
question? Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, yeah.
Have we ever seen nuclear energy crowd out renewables in the past?
Yes, we have, specifically in the US.
Really? But in 2020, the US was the #1 producer of nuclear power and was also the leader in renewables. So why can it not be both if it has been both in the past?
Again, our evidence, that's time, but our evidence indicates we need 100% efforts towards renewable to be clean by 2035.
Okay, if everyone's good at that, then my name is Nicole Lee. I am the second speaker on Acclive ZL, and this is just going to go talking about the negative case for my rebuttal. Everyone's good with that? We'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Judge, first group that's first and third contention on renewables. We have two responses at the top. First, dealing both. Affirming is not voting against renewables, but rather prioritizing nuclear energy is the best energy source. Nuclear will only crowd out fossil fuels. For example, Bloomberg 25 reports as France low carbon electricity output surged in 95% of power production, consisting of 67% from nuclear and 28% from renewables. And AI20 says the #1 producer of nuclear power is the US, which is also emerging as a strong leader in renewables. And the top 10 nuclear producing states have an average carbon intensity 30% lower than the national average. And second, dealing President Trump, since they admitted emissions are still rising. The problem with their argument is that it relies on renewable investment increasing, but the opposite will happen because The Guardian from February reports President Trump is blocking renewables like wind and solar energy by freezing federal approvals, funding, and projects. So A, in our current world, President Trump will block other sources of renewable energy. So when you're choosing between AF and neg, it's really a choice between nuclear energy, which will definitely be successful, and nothing, as 100% renewables is impossible. However, nuclear energy is the best option for decarbonization. They are only telling you one side of the story, but we need to make the comparison between nuclear energy and other clean sources of energy as we do in two ways. First, term of intermittency. Renewables cannot replace fossil fuels due to downtime. Carbon credits 23 wind only runs 35% of the time and solar 25% of the time, meaning fossil fuels are still required to fill in, which is why the use of fossil fuels rose with the use of renewables in 2024. Thankfully, nuclear energy operates at full capacity 92% of the time and can replace fossil fuels as the backbone while providing more energy, thus affirming is the only way to a real clean energy transition. And second, turn on cost efficiency. Maybe nuclear reactors cost more individually, but it has more bang for its buck. The Department of Energy 21 finds you would need over 3 million solar panels or 430 wind turbines to produce the same amount of power as one nuclear reactor. And then while they criticize nuclear reactors, there's also a couple of responses. One, turned on time, new nuclear reactors only take 6 or less years to build, and increased investment will only make processes faster. Their evidence says otherwise is wrong for two reasons. A, delink on licensing. The major reason for longer times was not construction, but a lengthy licensing process. Thankfully, under our new president, Harold Zanel 25 reports Congress has made regulatory changes to shorten the timeline for licensing and streamlining environmental reviews. And B, delink is outdated. The evidence may be from 2024, but it only cites sources reactors built in 1970. The average build time was 8.8 years, but ABC 24 says currently recent experience shows a large nuclear reactor shouldn't take more than 5 to 6 years to build. And on cost, A, with investment, the argument from our first contention on innovation reminds us that investment in nuclear energy is key to lower cost and increased efficiency. And B, long term, the bulk of the costs come from the initial cost of construction. But for the rest of its 80-year lifetime, nuclear energy is cheaper and produces more energy. And then on the second contention on terror, we have a few responses. First, dealing with terror down. There is no threat of terror impacts for either warrant. A, Byman 25 explains plots have been low due to the lack of operational support, military pressure on the Islamic State, and domestic counterterror. And B, while they try to use a link on right-wing extremists, this haven't happened in any other country under this situation. We've had reactors for years, and yet Melly 2017 explains how despite nuclear apocalypse being amplified in the media, a terrorist nuclear attack has not occurred to date. And second, dealing on the analytic, no matter where they come from, terrorists can't get a hold of nuclear weapons and material which are highly protected by the government. And three, dealing, there's no nuke weapons. Even in the event of receiving uranium, terrorists don't have the expense to craft an actual bomb. Kalama 24 says to craft a bomb is incredibly difficult. Groups had to steal years worth of fuel and need a sophisticated team of several hundreds to turn fuel into uranium for a weapon. Terrorist groups don't have a chance. Kimball 21 says nuclear material transferred must remain under its safeguards. The U.S. has the right to demand return, and consent is required for any retransfer and enrichment. And four, reject laundry list impacts. There is no warrants for every step on how one nuclear attack would cause global war and extinction. To avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we need to reduce emissions, but the world is falling behind. Nuclear energy is the only clean, reliable, and affordable energy, and the U.S. investment encourages other countries to decarbonize as well. Otherwise, 100 million people will die for every 0.1 degree Celsius of warming, and by 2030, climate change will become irreversible. Investment is also important to make sure nuclear fusion production is a reality, which can provide virtually limitless, clean, and safe and affordable energy and generate 4 million times more energy than coal. Only the nuclear energy is the way forward for reliable energy. It's a clear vote for the affirmative, ZL. Thank you.
All right, I'll take a little bit of prep. All right, I'm good. The order is going to be an overview of my opponent's arguments, defending my case, and then going to their case. Is everybody ready? All right. Start on their case. This is not a debate about whether we solve climate change or not. This is a debate about whether we solve climate change now or 30 years in the future. Insofar as this is true, even if nuclear energy has minor benefits, there are 4 reasons why it will never be sustainable in the long term. First, uranium shortage. Caldecott of the Washington Post finds that if nuclear energy replaced fossil fuels, economically viable uranium would only last for 3 years. Second is cost. Sullivan of the New York Magazine finds that the US would need $14 trillion to generate just half of its power from nuclear energy, which is 5 times more expensive than renewables. Don't buy any of their responses about how renewables are expensive insofar as they do not account for the total cost of building this infrastructural grid. Third is water shortages. Reactors require water to prevent overheating, but Chen quantifies that by 2040, nuclear reactors will not be able to cool their energy sources because of the rising heat of water due to global warming. D, it takes too long. Weber 21 explains that it takes 20 years for a nuclear reactor to be operational. Meanwhile, Richardson 23 explains that wind and solar farms take 8 months, making them better investments for solving the energy crisis happening right now. Thus, MIT concludes that all 104 reactors in the US will shut down by 2050 due to structural issues, not due to a lack of investment. Insofar as this is true, let's defend our case. First, they say that there's no trade-off. There's 2 problems with this. First of all, yes, there is, because 1, our argument is about crowding out in the private sector, and second, they compete for the same spot on the national grid. Overall, they also conceded that in cross, France takes 63% of its energy from nuclear and only 9% from renewables, which means that on net, there is a trade-off. On Trump is blocking it right now for our first argument about trade-off. Our argument is about the private sector, not about government investment in renewables. Right now, the private sector is investing in renewables. If the government invests, then that incentivizes private companies to shift away from renewables. Second, on intermittencies, I'll get to that on their case. Regarding how new reactors will only take a short time, they claim that our evidence cites sources from the 1970s. No, they didn't even call for our evidence. That's not what our evidence says. Second, they are only analyzing things like planning and licensing. Our evidence is better because it accounts for things like construction, sourcing of the materials, logistics. On terror, first they say that there's no threat of terror and that it's protected by the government. Group all of their defense because they can see the right-wing terror nuance, which is simply that because right-wing terror groups are in power right now due to Trump's presidency, overall that means that they get classified access to nuclear reactors, which gets rid of all their defense. On they can't craft a bomb. Yes, our evidence is the DoD. You should probably prioritize this evidence. On no laundry list, we have an incentive to respond to existential risk because it has the highest magnitude in the round. Let's go to their case. First, on climate change, even if CO2 emissions are reduced, Caldecott reports that the nuclear enrichment facility in Ohio releases 93% carbofluorine gas, which is 10,000 times more potent than CO2. Specifically on their links, there's no link because on link 1 about efficiency, only about 1% of the energy content in uranium is being converted to electricity. So in reality, it's about as energy efficient as coal. On link 2, we can diversify renewables, which means that we can invest in solar, wind, and hydropower, which means that even if one of them goes offline, the other 2 can fill in. On link 3, SMRs are uniquely worse because they have a greater risk of accidents from weaker containment systems. Let's go to jobs. Gordon 24 reports that nuclear power in Australia raised electricity bills by $665 a year due to cost overruns. This outweighs on scope because their argument only impacts employed people, but we impact all people in the United States. Second, renewables are much better for jobs because most nuclear jobs are in construction, but these are short-term jobs. But in the long-term, renewables require long-term maintenance and sustained employment growth. On fusion, their argument is completely absurd. None of their evidence says that this new technology called nuclear fusion, our current technology is called nuclear fission, by the way. Nuclear fusion is a new technology. There's 0 evidence in their case that actually indicates that we can develop nuclear fusion. And in fact, nobody is ahead in nuclear fusion because the Atomic Association explains that it is nearly impossible to make it because it requires overcoming the strong electrostatic repulsion between positively charged atomic nuclei. It is physically impossible according to the laws of science, which is why you can never innovate this supposedly new hypothetical new technology that they talk about. For these reasons, we urge a negative ballot.
Okay, are you ready to start cross?
Great. You can have
Okay.
first question.
Perfect. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so in your rebuttal, you bring up how basically you're talking about the private sector and then how basically the Trump delinking all the renewable investment won't impact the private sector. Then why would it that the government investing in nuclear impact the private sector? The private sector is already set on renewable investment.
All right, that's great. That's a great question. So currently, what we find is that the energy sector is increasingly moving towards renewable energy. What this means is that our fossil fuel dependence is dropping. So that means that when you increase, since companies have limited resources, right? Since fossil fuels are already extremely low and renewables are extremely high, what do you think it trades off with? Fossil fuels that are already extremely low or renewables that are extremely high? The fact
But
is
I
that if
don't
the
see,
government, sorry, can I finish?
yeah.
The fact is that if the government pumps trillions of $14 trillion into this new industry, which we don't even know the results of, but they're going to be constantly stimulating this sector, companies think that there's an opportunity there. So they're going to spend their limited resources on what the government is going to instead of still investing in renewable energy. Fossil fuels are already low. Nuclear energy is not going to trade off with fossil fuels. It's going to trade off with renewables. Can I have a question?
Yes.
All right, let's go to your case. Let's go specifically to jobs, right? I have a quick question. So regarding employment, right, is a majority of nuclear jobs in construction? Because per your own case, it takes a lot of effort to build nuclear reactors, right? Is most of this in construction, or is most of this in high skill, sustainable jobs?
Okay, so we don't have an exact number for that, but from the NEI, we can see that there's going to be a variety of jobs, whether that's construction or maintenance for the nuclear power plants or doing research towards it. There's going to be a lot, and while there isn't specific statistics on,
Okay.
oh, this is how many people
Um,
are employed in construction, it still shows that a variety of people can be employed in these jobs.
that's great. I just wanted to point out something you said. You said that most of these jobs are in construction or maintenance,
I didn't
correct?
say that. I just said there's
You
jobs in construction, maintenance, operations, all this kind of stuff.
okay? Okay, that's great. You can have a question then.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to ask basically on your contention about no, not your contention, but basically how we are going to not solve climate change in the future. You were talking about how there's a current uranium shortage. Is that just like in the entire world? Is that what you're citing?
It's specifically, yeah, it's holistic. It's saying that the US, even if it relies on imports or domestic mining, it can't fulfill uranium capacity. So our argument is instead of investing 30 years into building a nuclear reactor, and we don't even know if we're able to get the resources to make these operational, we should instead be solving for renewables, which have been predicted to solve climate change by 2035. The US could go carbon neutral by 2035 if the private sector continues to invest in renewables. I think
Can
that's
I ask a
cross.
follow-up since we have like 10 seconds?
Oh, we have 10 seconds. Okay.
Yeah. So renewables also need materials. So how can you say that renewables are going to have the materials to sustain itself
Well,
for that long
I'm,
if you're saying
I'm
we
sorry.
won't have enough for nuclear?
Because renewables don't rely on uranium.
Yeah, but they rely on other materials that still need mining and stuff. So
Yeah,
how long can we go on a full
but the fact
100%
is that
renewable?
the fact is that one, you didn't bring this up in rebuttal. Second, it's abundant. Uranium is one of the rarest resources on Earth. Like I don't understand what's the comparative here.
Okay.
But that's cross. Good
Thanks.
cross.
We will take 2 minutes. We can take prep time before. Okay, so we'll take 2 minutes 30 on summary, starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's time. Ellen, are you ready?
Is everyone ready for the next speech? Once again, we are the affirmative team, Acclive ZL, and the structure of my speech is going to be our case, their case, then weighing if time permits. And if everyone's ready, I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Let's start by extending and defending the two affirmative points. First is climate change. Judge, let me make this decision super clear for you. The current system is not working. Despite worldwide renewable use being the highest ever in 2024, emissions and fossil fuel use increased, and emissions fell by just 0.2%, a far cry from the 1.5% decrease that we need. If you vote negative for renewables, just like history has proved, they will never work because sources like solar and wind cannot replace fossil fuels due to weather downtime issues, generate too little electricity, and will continue to be cut by President Trump. The only option forward is voting affirmative for nuclear energy, a clean, efficient energy source. As decreased emissions by 20%, generates the energy equivalent to 3 million solar panels or over 400 wind turbines, is 2.5 to 3.5 times more dependable, and produces energy to power renewables, which outweighs any difference in individual costs. They give you a couple of responses criticizing nuclear energy. First, they criticize the building time, because even though the average building time for nuclear reactors built since 1970 was 8.8 years, you should always buy our most recent evidence saying it only takes 5 to 6 years to build down. But even that on the time frame, first, climate change only becomes irreversible if we don't decarbonize by 2050, in which nuclear reactors will be built no matter whose evidence you trust. Second, affirming still solves in the long term, as while solar panels can go up in a couple of years, they go down in a couple of years as well. Nuclear reactors last for 80 years or more and produce magnitudes more energy. Second, the uranium reliance is not a problem because we can recycle 97% of nuclear fuel. However, renewables face challenges of mineral limits. Snyder 23 says the comprehensive review shows that renewable systems are not feasible. 5 times more copper is needed than is known to exist on the Earth. Our second point is innovation. If you vote affirmative, you are also investing in nuclear research for nuclear fusion energy, which can provide 4 million times more energy than oil or coal. Our research already shows that the first reactor, the first plant can be ready by the end of President Trump's second term. And if their response to that fusion isn't possible, if that was true, why would countries like China, US, and Russia all be investing on it? But let's talk about the negative side. Their renewables argument collapses for 3 reasons. First, nuclear energy only crowds out fossil fuels, not other green energy sources. Both can be integrated into the grid. Look at the success of France, which drives 67% for nuclear and 28% for renewables, making 95% of their energy come from green sources. Even if you believe renewables can play a role in the green transition, a vote affirmative is not a vote against renewables, rather to diversify to include nuclear energy. Second, the all renewable transition they call for is never going to happen. The Guardian from February reports that Trump is significantly blocking renewables, and independently, this also delinks the crowd argument, because if government action against renewables doesn't decrease private sector investment, there's no reason that action for nuclear energy will. Third, we still need to prioritize nuclear energy over renewables. While they try to criticize nuclear energy, realize they're only telling you one side of the story. We are the only side that makes them comparative. Nuclear energy is 3 times more reliable, generates magnitudes more energy, its efficiency outweighs anything. Because renewables are intermittent, a world running on them is a world where fossil fuels will be required 70% of the time, which is why in past years they never were. Let's talk about terror. They're only responses that right-wing terror now, but we also tell you that has never happened in other countries, nor will it, because terrorists cannot steal uranium fuel and then magically craft weapons that already takes our military years to do. But on the weighing, first is Lincoln. We solve the issues that the negative brings up, and second, the irreversibility and staggering magnitude of climate change means that if we win this argument, you should vote for us. Not only is it extinction impact, it's also more probable than nuclear war. This is a clear vote for the affirmative to solve the problems of today and our future. Thank you.
Great, we're going to take some prep.
Okay, that was 1 minute and 30 seconds. Let me just write that down. The order of my speech will start on our arguments and move on to my opponent's arguments. Is everyone ready? All right, perfect. Time starts now. Both teams have agreed that extinction comes first based on magnitude and it's a prerequisite. Probability does not matter. In fact, both teams impact extinction. Probability is always subjective and requires judge intervention. They concede our link to our argument, which is why you should buy it and vote on the risk of the argument. Also, probability doesn't matter because of a fraction of infinity and still infinity. At that point, investing in a sinking ship is not the answer. Our argument is that nuclear energy will always fail and is always worse than alternatives. Historically, when nuclear gains influence, renewables lose ground due to decreased funding, increased lobbying, and decreased private investment, which is our main reasoning. We both agree climate change is existential. Here's what they drop. First is that regardless of nuclear, renewables will already solve climate change by 2035. We shouldn't risk this already green revolution. Second, renewables are not intermittent because there are batteries being developed now and we can have a diversification of renewables, for example, hydro, wind, and solar, which build on top of each other. Third, our argument is not about federal funds; it's about private investors who stop investing when we switch to nuclear. On our terrorist argument, nuclear expansion spreads uranium across more sites, creating more chance for terrorists. Extremist groups in the US have confidential information and can access through these nuclear facilities. The Department of Defense concludes that if they get their hands on materials, they can build nuclear weapons and will escalate. A single terrorist attack would cause worldwide destabilization wars and escalate to extinction through a nuclear famine. Their only response is that terrorism is improbable due to security, it's hard to get materials, etc. One, again, probably doesn't matter. Two, they ignore the extremist groups in the military that have confidential information that lets them in. It doesn't matter how good the security is because they have that confidential information. Second and third, our evidence is that from the US's own Department of Defense and the Office of Technology, which indicates that terrorists can build these nuclear weapons. That's the most credible source. It's the US's own intelligence department. Realize that this argument is actually highly probable because these terrorist actors are highly irrational. They want to just achieve their end goal. And this argument also outweighs on time frame because it occurs as soon as you start building, as soon as you start developing these nuclear plants, whereas climate change takes years and years to solve. Extinction can't happen twice, which means time frame matters which means time frame short circuits based on sequencing. Go to my opponent's arguments. Let's start on the overview. Realize that economically viable uranium would run out in just 3 years if nuclear replaced fossil fuels. It is not long term. Second, and more importantly, it costs $14 trillion to develop just half of the US nuclear power to be energy. That's half of the US GDP. Additionally, they can see the evidence that's 5 times more expensive, which is the only evidence that does the comparative in the round. Third is that companies struggle to get the land due to geographic constraints, meaning large-scale reactors are infeasible. And lastly, it takes 20 years to build construction. They themselves admit that climate change is a pressing issue and we need solutions by 2050. If it takes 20 years on average to build, it won't save climate change on time. Our evidence is better than theirs. It analyzes the average and every single planning process, whereas theirs doesn't. On their first argument about the climate, they have ignored that their evidence only looks at carbon dioxide. Ours looks at chloro something, which is 10,000 times more worse than carbon dioxide. Their evidence never accounts for it. More importantly, they ignore that new nuclear reactors, like small modular reactors, are actually even worse for the environment because they have weak containment systems and produce even more emissions. On their second argument about the economy, they concede renewables create jobs 12 times faster. And on their argument about US leadership, they concede that nuclear fusion is not possible. For these reasons, we urge a negative ballot in today's round.
Is everyone ready for crossfire?
Yeah.
Sorry, let me set my timer up. So, may I have the first question?
Yeah, you can have the first question.
I'll begin the timer now. You said at the end of your speech, a couple seconds over time, that fusion is not possible. So if fusion is not possible, why are the leading countries like China, Russia, and the US putting in billions of dollars to research it? Do you think
wait, hold on. I think I can answer this.
First of all, it was only 1 second over time, but I'll let my partner answer this.
Sorry. I think I have a good response to this. So first of all, countries are often willing to invest in things that are physically impossible or very low probability scenarios as long as the reward is extremely high. So you've heard of high risk, high reward, right? So that's that fact. I'm sorry. Could you please let me finish? So that factors into a lot of countries' decision calculus. So despite the fact that a lot of these countries have invested significant amount into fusion, the recent scientific consensus is that nuclear fusion, as research accumulates, they found that increasingly nuclear fusion is impossible. It's physically impossible due to the way that electrons work. So because of that, it's facing a dead end. So that's why we believe that in the next couple of years, the interest in nuclear fusion is going to die down. Because initially they were interested because it was high risk, high reward. Now, as more research comes out, they found out that it's scientifically impossible to do nuclear fusion.
So who wrote your evidence? Is it an actual
It's
group
from
of
the Atomic Agency.
It's the International Atomic Association. So they're the ones who regulate and control all atomic
our
research, especially regarding nuclear fusion.
25, right? It says that nuclear fusion is possible, but also just logically, right? The new scientists have known that nuclear fusion. Sure, you say that you think that scientists have found out recently that nuclear fusion is not possible. So even
Yeah,
then,
exactly. They found out recently it's not possible. So that's why countries are starting to not invest because
Okay,
they
but
realize it's scientifically impossible.
I think that the big question at the end of the day is
that's
if the
right.
judges should vote on gambling billions of dollars on this experimental technology or investing in what works already, which is renewables, which are on track to solve by 2035. You guys can ask a question.
Sure. So our evidence still says that the first fusion power plant can begin operations shortly after President Trump's second term. With which, by the way, this is still
But
a piece of drop. So we can make
I'm
the
sorry, I'm sorry. After President Trump's second term, that's 2032, correct? But comparatively, renewables take 8 months to build, right?
Wait,
so
So
you
what
like
even if it only takes 8 years, which it doesn't, why would we prefer nuclear energy in 8 years over renewables in 8 months?
yeah, so no problem. The problem is that renewable in all renewable scenario is feasibly not possible, right? Like we said, it requires 5 times more copper than is found on the planet. And also, renewables are just intermittent. They rely on the weather. Let's say, okay, let's take you at their best. Let's say that these renewables can support solar and wind run 25 and 35% of the time respectively.
Well,
Let's say they only
I'm
run
sorry,
when
just really quickly, we can diversify renewable resources. We can put it
so
into
why don't
just like
we
I'm sorry, just like how you diversify your stocks to prevent one singular crash, you can
so why don't
diversify into multiple different renewable
we
sources to prevent it from ever going offline. Is
so if we
that
want
possible?
clean energy sources, then we should vote affirmative to increase usage of nuclear energy. They can both work together. That's cross.
Okay, I'd like to take the last 30 seconds of prep time, starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's time. This is just going to go talking about the two key reasons, basically our case, then their case, and then weighing. If everyone's good with that, we'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Judge, there are two key reasons to vote affirmative. First, nuclear energy is the only way to decarbonize to prevent climate change from killing our planet. While they try to claim that renewables can be solved by 2035, they ignore historical evidence because when renewable use was the highest ever in 2024, emissions and fossil fuels use increased and emissions fell by just 0.2%. The only option for it is voting affirmative for nuclear energy, a clean, efficient energy source. As decreased emissions by 20%, generates the energy equivalent to 3 million solar panels or over 400 wind turbines, is 2.5 to 3.5 times more dependable, and produces energy to power renewables. This efficiency outweighs any cost. And A, their only solution still is that all renewable scenario, but it isn't possible. We would still need fossil fuels 70% of the time because they are intermittent and rely on weather. And B, the uranium reliance is not a problem. We can recycle 97% of fuel. Even then, Snyder 23 adds that the comprehensive review of the feasibility of an 100% renewable system shows that none of them are feasible because you would need 5 times more copper than is known on the Earth. And then second, on fusion, we are the only side offering scientific evidence. World leaders know that if you vote affirmative, you are investing in research for nuclear fusion energy, which can provide 4 million times more energy than oil or coal, avoid waste and accidents, and ultimately provide limitless, clean, safe, and affordable energy. Otherwise, we cede our leadership to authoritarian countries like China and Russia, which also create transition wars, which they concede. And their only argument is that it's impossible. However, Mumgarden College 25 reports that a first fusion power plant will begin short operations shortly after President Trump's second term, meaning it's already happening. More sources find that it is possible than their cherry-picked evidence. And then on weighing, let's look at the link for nuclear war. One nuclear attack has never caused it, but a great power war between China and the US certainly will. We are the only side linking into recent extinction, just years after you vote negative, when China will win the fusion race and thus exacerbate tensions. And second, rejector timeframe weighing, we are the only side solving in the long term. Nuclear reactors will provide for over 80 years each, while renewables come down in a couple years. If we only need to solve by 2050, which is 25 years. Prefer long-term benefits. And furthermore, you can never vote for their case on terrorism. It is impossible to build bombs, no matter where these people come from. Even in the event of receiving uranium, terrorists don't have the expertise to craft an actual bomb. Their evidence is all from policymakers who want the fearmonger to get into office. Thus, to solve all issues brought up into this round, prevent extinction, please vote for nuclear energy. Thank you.
All right. How much more prep do we have? Like 20? I
I
forgot.
think based on my timer, I think you took up all your prep. You took 130 for your first time, and then your second time you took
Okay,
something
that's
over.
okay with us. The order in that case is going to be clarifying uniqueness, so what's happening right now, terrorism, and then probably just the general climate debate. Is everybody ready? The only spot where they can possibly win the round is if they win the uniqueness that currently renewables aren't working. However, there's two problems. First, they've never interacted with our uniqueness evidence, which says that renewables are already on track to solve climate change by 2035. You prefer this evidence because, again, per Paul's analysis, this evidence postdates, but in addition to that, they themselves have conceded that a nuclear power plant comes into term after Trump's second term, which means that even if you buy that nuclear energy is slightly better than renewable energy, it's too late to solve for climate change by then. Instead, we should prioritize renewables, which solve in 8 months. Insofar as this is true, let's go to terrorism. Our argument is simple. Insofar as right-wing terrorists have infiltrated the military in the highest echelons of the military, they can have classified access to nuclear facilities, stealing nuclear materials, and building a bomb. They just say that it's due to fear mongering. First of all, no, this is literally a new response in first final focus. Second of all, they have never interacted with their probability analysis, which says that A, it's subjective, and B, requires judge intervention, and C, the Department of Defense itself, which has an incentive to uphold national security, has said that these terrorists could likely build a nuclear bomb as long as they get nuclear material. Insofar as this is true, we link into probability better because of our agency analysis. Paul explains that states are rational actors because they always have an incentive to stop climate change, but terrorists are irrational actors. These are the people who are willing to blow themselves up for an ideology, which means that it has a far higher risk of causing climate change. In addition, they've conceded the time frame analysis, which says that terrorism on net will always trigger first, specifically because they always have a lasting incentive to do accelerationism, and extinction can't happen twice. Climate change is a wall to fix. But finally, on trade-off, we're still winning on trade-off because insofar as they've conceded that by 2035, renewables are going to solve climate change, as long as you stab from private sector funding and you crowd out from the grid, that means that nuclear energy is going to pull away funding from renewables without any other solution in mind. Overall, this turns their entire case. Insofar as that's true, also extend that currently renewables are completely unviable because it will cost $14 trillion due to cost overruns. We can't build it right now. It will lead to economic catastrophe. That's terminal defense. It's conceded.
It's time.
All right. I won like 5 seconds over time, or like 6.
Yeah, so we could just, I guess that's okay.
Yeah. All right, good round. I
All right,
really
good round,
enjoyed it.
everyone, and thank you for judging.
So high five, everyone.
From the